London never truly sleeps. But on a narrow stretch of South London, there's a gate that never rests. Not at night, not at dawn, not when the city forgets what happens behind it. This is HMP Brixton. From the outside, it looks like a relic. High Victorian walls, soot-darkened brick, iron bars that feel frozen in time. But step closer, and the air changes. The street noise fades. The silence presses back. Because behind these walls are thousands of lives stacked on top of each other. Men waiting, men breaking, men pretending they're not afraid. Brixton is not just a prison. It's a pressure chamber. It was built for a very different London. A smaller population. Slower courts. Fewer bodies. Today, it holds far more men than it was ever meant to. Cells designed for one now holding 2, sometimes 3. Narrow landings echo with tension. Every door slam carries history. Some inmates arrive for a few days. Some stay for months. None arrive prepared for what comes next. Because HMP Brixton is a local prison, meaning it never stops receiving people. Remand prisoners, newly sentenced men, those still legally innocent but locked up anyway. The population turns over constantly, and that chaos creates something worse than violence: uncertainty. You don't know who your cellmate will be. You don't know how long you'll be here. And you don't know if the system has already forgotten your name. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're re-watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. Former prisoners say there's one moment that defines whether you'll survive Brixton. Not your trial. Not your sentence. Your first night. Because that's when the noise hits. Metal doors slamming. Someone screaming 2 floors above you. Someone else crying quietly, hoping nobody hears. The toilet in the corner of the cell gurgles, inches from where you're expected to sleep. The light never fully goes out. And then there's your cellmate, a stranger, locked within arm's reach, with their own fears, charges, and breaking points. Many men later say the worst thing about Brixton isn't violence. It's the waiting. The overcrowding. The feeling that you've been placed inside a machine that is jammed, and you one more body forcing the gears to grind. To understand how HMP Brixton became this way, we have to go back. Back before modern London. Back to an era when prisons were meant to punish, not rehabilitate. HMP Brixton opened in the 19th century, during a time when Britain believed imprisonment itself was the punishment. Cells were small by design. Silence was encouraged. Isolation was intentional. Back then, Brixton wasn't meant to overflow. It was built with rigid assumptions, that numbers would stay manageable, that systems wouldn't crack, that men could be processed like paperwork. Those assumptions didn't survive history. Wars came. Economic collapses followed. Crime patterns changed. Court backlogs grew. But Brixton's walls stayed exactly where they were, immovable, unexpanded, and increasingly unfit for the reality they contained. By the late 20th century, warnings began to surface. Official inspections raised alarms about overcrowding, hygiene, and mental health strain. Staff were stretched thin. Inmates spent longer locked in cells meant for solitude, not endurance. Brixton became a holding pen for London's overflow, a place that absorbed pressure so the rest of the system didn't explode. But pressure doesn't disappear. It concentrates. Every day, vans pull up outside Brixton's gates. Inside them are men from police stations across London, exhausted, confused, sometimes intoxicated, sometimes mentally unwell. Many don't know if they'll be released or sentenced weeks later. This is the brutality of remand custody. You can be legally innocent and still be placed in one of the most crowded prisons in the country. No timeline. No certainty. Just waiting. Processing is fast and impersonal. Property logged. Shoelaces removed. Questions fired off while officers scan for risk, violence, self-harm, withdrawal, desperation. There is no room for delay. Because behind you, more men are arriving. New prisoners are pushed into cells where space has already run out. Bunks bolted to walls. Mattresses laid on floors. Toilets partially shielded, offering little dignity. Privacy becomes a memory. Silence becomes impossible. And in a place like Brixton, that loss of personal space isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. Overcrowding doesn't just strain buildings. It changes behavior. When too many men are locked in too tight a space, small issues become flashpoints. A comment, a stare, a queue that takes too long. In Brixton, tension lives in the air, felt rather than seen. Former officers describe patrols that feel less like supervision and more like damage control. Staff numbers haven't risen to match population growth. Experience drains away as burnout sets in. Prisoners notice everything. They know which officers are overwhelmed. They know when mistakes are more likely. They know when the system is too tired to respond fast enough. That's when informal hierarchies form. Who controls the phone? Who dictates cell swaps? Who can make your life easier, or much worse? And unlike high-security prisons, Brixton houses a volatile mix. Petty offenders, serious criminals, men detoxing, men protecting reputations they brought in from the streets. It's not a long-term prison, but for many, it becomes the most psychologically intense place they've ever been. Over the years, HMP Brixton has made headlines, not for escapes, but for deaths in custody. Each case different, each one raising the same questions. Were the warning signs missed? Was the prison simply too full to intervene in time? Or had the system accepted risk as collateral damage? Investigations often point to the same underlying problems: overcrowding, staff shortages, delays in mental health support. Brixton isn't alone in this, but its size and turnover magnify every failure. For prisoners, these deaths create a chilling effect. You realize how easy it is to disappear here. A number, a file, a report. And once you understand that, the prison takes on a new shape, not just a place of punishment, but a place where survival depends on learning the rules fast. There is an unofficial education every man receives inside Brixton. Don't ask too many questions. Don't touch what isn't yours. Don't bring street beef into shared spaces unless you're ready to finish it. Because in overcrowded prisons, reputation travels faster than paperwork. Men learn who to avoid, who talks too much, who can't handle pressure. The strongest currency isn't money, it's predictability. If you're predictable, you're safer. If you're erratic, you become a problem. And Brixton has no patience for problems. For over 2 centuries, one London prison has stood as a symbol of the justice system's breaking point. HMP Brixton. Decades of reports have called it outdated, overcrowded, and unfit for purpose. Yet, it's still here. Why? Because without it, London's courts would grind to a halt overnight. Police rely on it to hold men remanded in custody. The courts rely on it to produce defendants for trial. The entire system keeps feeding people into a structure that is already buckling under the weight. Brixton isn't an exception in the prison system. It's a warning. It's a real-time snapshot of what happens when demand outpaces humanity, when infrastructure crumbles but expectations never change. But for the men locked inside, none of that big-picture stuff matters. What matters is tonight, who you're sharing a cell with, whether you'll get any sleep, and whether tomorrow finally brings release, or just another day inside walls that feel like they're always closing in. If Brixton Prison has a heartbeat, you can feel it on the wings. These are long, narrow corridors, stacked 3 or 4 levels high, with metal railings worn smooth by decades of hands gripping them for support. Officers, inmates, everyone just bracing themselves as they move through the noise. Voices and footsteps echo constantly, bouncing off the hard surfaces, creating a sound that never really stops. Each wing operates like its own compressed, high-stakes neighborhood. Men wake up together, they queue for everything together: medication, showers, phones, and most of all, they wait together. And in a prison that is bursting far beyond its intended limits, that constant waiting becomes its own unique form of punishment. The short windows of time when cell doors are unlocked, known as association, are pure chaos. There are never enough phones. Tempers are always short. And every single movement is watched, not just by the officers, but by other prisoners who are constantly sizing you up, trying to figure out where you fit in the pecking order. If you're too quiet, you're marked as weak and a potential target. If you're too loud, you're seen as reckless and a threat. So you see men hugging the walls, keeping their eyes down, just trying to time their movements to avoid any attention at all. Others project a loud confidence they absolutely do not feel, because in a place like Brixton, perception is your only armor. The cells themselves offer no escape. They never truly cool down, either emotionally or physically. Imagine 2 grown men sharing stale, humid air in a space designed for one, trying to negotiate silence, personal space, and sleep. Some cellmates will talk all night, driving you mad. Others won't say a single word for days, which can be just as unnerving. Both scenarios can push a person right to the very edge of their sanity. And caught in the middle of all this are the prison officers, trying desperately to maintain control with not enough staff, outdated Victorian layouts that create blind spots, and policies that were written by people sitting in quiet offices, far away from the relentless noise and pressure of the wings. We often judge prisons by the people locked inside them. But you can truly understand a place like Brixton without looking at the people who are paid to work there. Many prison officers start their careers with a strong belief in structure and fairness, that rules matter, routines bring order, and everyone deserves to be treated decently. Brixton tests those ideals from day one. Chronic overcrowding means officers are responsible for supervising far more men than any training manual would deem safe. Experienced staff burn out and leave, taking their vital knowledge with them. New recruits are then trained inside a system that is already frayed at the edges. Mistakes happen. Not because people don't care, but because there simply isn't enough time to care properly. On any given shift, an officer has to make instant judgments. Who gets my attention first? Which shout sounds like a real emergency? Who can probably wait? Those impossible choices don't just disappear when their shift ends. They stay with them. And the prisoners feel that strain. When the authority figures look tired and overwhelmed, an informal power structure run by inmates starts to grow in the vacuum. When official responses are slow, rumors and paranoia fill the gaps. This imbalance creates something incredibly dangerous. A prison where nobody feels fully in control, including the people who are officially in charge. Brixton isn't just overcrowded with bodies. It's overcrowded with trauma. A significant number of men arrive at its gates already fragile. They bring with them histories of addiction, untreated mental illness, and lives built on profound instability. The prison doesn't necessarily cause these issues, but it acts like a powerful amplifier. The cells become pressure cookers for the mind. The constant, unpredictable noise, the total lack of privacy, the gnawing uncertainty about your court case, it all grinds you down, day by day. Anxiety builds in the confined spaces. Sleep deprivation erodes your judgment and your ability to cope. Mental health teams exist, but they are completely overwhelmed. The demand for their help far outstrips their capacity. Appointments get delayed for weeks. Crises escalate far faster than help can possibly arrive. For some men, their time in Brixton becomes the absolute lowest point of their lives, not because of the sentence itself, but because of the crushing mental toll of the environment. And once a person's hope starts to thin, their behavior changes. Some men withdraw completely, becoming ghosts on the wing. Others lash out in frustration or fear. And some just stop caring whether tomorrow comes at all. This is the point where overcrowding stops being a logistical problem on a spreadsheet and becomes a deeply human crisis. Over the years, HMP Brixton has held its share of famous inmates. Musicians, high-profile gang figures, public faces whose arrests were splashed across the news. For a brief moment, the outside world would pay attention, peering inside the notorious prison. But that celebrity status never changed the fundamentals of life inside. Those high-profile names were locked behind the same worn-out doors. They ate the same food from the same trolleys. They waited in the same long queues for the phones, just like everyone else. Inside the prison, any notoriety they had on the outside faded incredibly quickly. It was replaced by the same blunt reality and the same set of rules that applied to every single man there. Because Brixton doesn't revolve around fame or reputation. It revolves around one thing: numbers, head count. And no matter who you think you are on the outside, the moment that cell door slams shut, you're just another body in a critically overcrowded system. There have been moments in Brixton's history when the entire institution edged closer to the brink. Riots, protests, major disturbances, tensions escalating over poor conditions, infuriating delays in the justice system, and frustrations that had simply stacked up too high to be contained. Each of these incidents tended to follow a familiar pattern. Overcrowding acted as the spark, and the pervasive sense of uncertainty and powerlessness was the fuel. Official reports written afterward often use careful, sanitized language. They talk about challenging conditions, operational pressures, and areas identified for improvement. But the men who lived through it tell a different story. They talk about days when the routines completely collapsed, when staff were so outnumbered they struggled to respond fast enough to emergencies. They talk about a palpable fear that traveled through the wings faster than any official announcement. In those moments of chaos, Brixton reveals its core truth. The prison functions, but only just. And that razor-thin margin between order and collapse is being tested every single day. People often assume that serving time in a short-term or remand prison like Brixton must be easier than a long sentence. They're wrong. In many ways, it's harder. In long-term prisons, routines eventually stabilize. The population settles down, and clear power structures solidify over time. You learn the rules, both official and unofficial. In Brixton, everything is temporary, and that constant instability makes it far more volatile and unpredictable. You have no idea who is arriving on your wing tomorrow. You don't know who's leaving. You have no idea what kind of energy or trouble they're bringing with them. Fear, ego, desperation, paranoia, sudden bursts of rage. It all circulates much faster in a transient environment where no one has time to settle. In fact, some men who have served years in other prisons say that their short time in Brixton felt more intense and dangerous than anywhere else, because there was no time to adapt. You were just dropped into the middle of the chaos and expected to survive it, right from the first minute. What do former prisoners of HMP Brixton talk about first? It's not the violence. It's the noise. A constant, relentless sound. Keys jangling, heavy doors slamming shut, a TV blaring through a paper-thin wall, an argument kicking off 3 cells down. Even at night, the prison doesn't sleep. It hums with a tense energy. Men who've been inside say you learn to read the mood of an entire wing just by listening. You know when things are about to go wrong before you even leave your cell. The usual buzz gets quiet, conversations get clipped, and the joking stops. That's when you know to stay in your head and out of the way. One man put it this way: I didn't feel like I was doing time. I felt like time was doing something to me. This isn't just a feeling, it's a known psychological phenomenon. When people lose their personal space, the brain's threat response kicks into overdrive. Stress hormones flood your system, patience vanishes, and the smallest annoyance feels like a direct personal attack. Brixton is a textbook example of this in action, day in, day out. There's no real retreat. The cells are cramped, the exercise yards are rushed, meals are hurried. Every single part of the day involves a queue. In this environment, people stop seeing each other as individuals and start seeing them as obstacles. That's why fights break out over a phone, a shower, or even a chair. It's never really about the object itself. It's about the last shred of autonomy that overcrowding strips away. And for the officers, they re-caught in an impossible situation, forced to enforce rules while knowing they can't possibly meet everyone's basic needs. It's a system that puts everyone under constant, quiet pressure. Where there's pressure, people will always seek an escape. That's why drugs find their way into Brixton, despite endless efforts to stop them. But substances do more than just numb the pain. They create a new kind of chaos, an economy of debt and control. A borrowed moment of relief can quickly turn into an obligation, and that obligation can turn into fear. In a place as crowded as Brixton, drug debts don't just disappear. They follow men from wing to wing, and sometimes they follow them right out the gates. Then there are the court days. These are the emotional fault lines of the prison. Men wake up early, their nerves raw, replaying every possible outcome in their minds. Will they walk free? Will their sentence get longer? When the transport vans return later that day, the entire wing seems to hold its breath. A few men won't come back, their time at Brixton's suddenly over. But many others return, visibly heavier. Bail denied. Sentence extended. In an overcrowded prison, bad news travels faster than good news. One person's disappointment can cast a shadow over dozens of others who are just trying to hold on. Hope becomes a dangerous thing to invest in. Inside, time itself starts to feel strange. The days stretch on forever, but the weeks just blur together and disappear. Men lose track of dates, of seasons. For those on remand, who don't even know when their ordeal will end, it's even worse. Your life is just paused, indefinitely. But not everyone's story is one of conflict or crisis. Some men survive by making themselves invisible. They follow every rule, speak only when they have to, and avoid any and all conflict. They don't form alliances. They don't borrow. They just try to blend into the walls. To an outsider, they might look like they're coping. But that invisibility has a steep price, an intense isolation layered on top of the confinement. For these men, the pressure doesn't cause an explosion. It causes a slow, quiet erosion of who they are. For many, leaving Brixton is just as jarring as entering. One moment, you're behind a locked door. The next, you're standing on the street with your entire life in a plastic bag. The constant noise is gone, replaced by traffic, crowds, and endless choices. Some men literally freeze on the spot. Others walk away as fast as they can, as if the prison walls might reach out and drag them back. Freedom, for some, feels less real than the cell they just left behind. So why, after decades of warnings, does Brixton remain so dangerously overcrowded? Because fixing it means facing uncomfortable truths about our entire justice system, sentencing, court delays, and our acceptance of crisis as the norm. Brixton isn't the most violent prison, or the worst. What makes it so damaging is something harder to see. It's a place that's full. Full of people waiting, full of staff stretched to their breaking point, and full of systems failing slowly, day by day, man by man. It doesn't break people overnight. It just quietly wears them down. And that pressure, that feeling of being worn down, follows you long after the gates close behind you. Periodic inspections of HMP Brixton always bring a flurry of promises. Official reports acknowledge the pressures, the language tightens, and recommendations stack up. Headlines flicker for a moment, and then, daily reality resumes. Because inspections don't reduce court backlogs. They don't magically build new cells or create space overnight. So Brixton just keeps operating in this state of managed strain, never quite collapsing, but never quite improving either. This is the very definition of institutional fatigue. Ask a former inmate if Brixton changed them, and you'll likely see a pause. Not because the answer is unclear, but because it's deeply complicated. Some say it made them sharper, more aware, less naive. Others say it hollowed something out of them, their trust, their ease, the simple ability to relax in a quiet room. Many describe the exact same experience, that first night after release when the silence feels louder than the prison ever was. No doors slamming, no shouting, no head counts. And yet, sleep doesn't come. HMP Brixton teaches lessons our society rarely wants to admit it's giving. It teaches that capacity matters more than good intentions. That overcrowding isn't neutral. It actively shapes human behavior. And that even a short-term detention can carry devastating long-term consequences. It shows exactly what happens when systems are forced to rely on resilience instead of actual repair. Brixton's walls belong to another century, but its problems are firmly in the present. As populations grow and court systems slow down, institutions like this become more and more common, outdated structures trying to carry a modern demand. The prison isn't an anomaly. It's a forecast. The change Brixton brings to a person isn't sudden. There's no single dramatic moment. It's a slow accumulation. The sound of a door locking behind you for the 100th time. The feeling of sharing air, space, and fear with strangers you never chose. The days spent waiting for decisions made by people who will never hear the noise of the wing at night. For many, Brixton is just a chapter, weeks or months on paper. But psychologically, it lingers. Once you've lived inside overcrowding, you carry it with you. You notice tight rooms. You read faces differently. You understand how quickly things collapse when demand exceeds care. HMP Brixton isn't just a prison in South London. It's a warning carved in brick. A reminder that justice systems don't fail all at once. They strain, they stretch, and they normalize pressure until the human cost becomes just background noise. So the next time you pass walls like these, remember, what happens inside doesn't stay inside. Prisons like Brixton don't just confine people. They reflect the limits of what a society is willing to hold. And when those limits are reached, someone always feels it first. Thank you for watching.